I'm John Little for Megashock.com, and this is the Weekend ShockCast for March 15th, 2014. It was another unsettled week, and not just in the headlines. There was an ominous feel about this past week that went beyond the troubling news. It could be that the entities that go bump in the night are starting to see the light of day. Or maybe I'm just feeling the effects of toxic air from mainland China. But there can be no denying that something is going on. The CIA, through its National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, is rushing forward to consolidate their takeover of Ukraine. Russia is moving to neutralize this threat and make a countermove of her own. That countermove is the vote tomorrow by the residents of Crimea over how they will secede from Ukraine. The U.S. and Europe have promised sanctions, or the threat of them, on Monday, and you can bet that the next few moves will have been planned well in advance. Both sides know each other very, very well, so the question in my mind is about miscalculation. Whoever screws up first loses. I will be starting a series on Monday that will cover what I believe to be the next few moves in this chess match between the West and the East. It's going to be a tense game, but there's something that all of us can rest assured in. God wins. So let's get to what happened on Megashock.com this week. On Monday, it was the Jesuit elephant in the room. As we sit here waiting for the next move in the global chess match between the West and the East, I'd like to talk about the other elephant in the room. It's a curious animal. It's hard to see. It doesn't seem to take up much room. It doesn't say much. It hears everything. It worships power, and it is the most effective intelligence and black operations organization in the world. Oh, and they consume a lot of money. And if you follow the money trail far enough and deep enough, you'll run into a Jesuit banker. One of the people that put me onto the Jesuit bankers was the World Bank whistleblower Karen Hudis. I've been paying attention to what Karen has been saying for a while, and she offers some startling observations. Note, it may seem like I'm jumping about in this article, but I'm not. When Timothy said that the love of money was the root of all evil, he wasn't just blowing smoke. He was making an important point. Here's the verse. Quote, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." Close quote, 1 Timothy 6:10. Is money the root of all evil? Of course not, but the love of it definitely is. Those of you who know anything about counterterrorism operations know that terrorism cannot exist without money, lots of money. The Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, could not have existed without it. The Irish Republican Army, or IRA, could not have existed without it. China became communist because Mao had it and Chiang Kai-shek didn't. And it was a train full of gold that made the Russian Revolution possible. That's why follow the money is stamped all over almost everything that I write. If you follow the money, you find out who is pulling the strings and who is causing the conflict. An example of this is the latest move in the West-East global chess match. The recent Ukrainian revolution could not have happened without lots and lots of money. And all we needed to know to find out whose money it was, well, we just had to ask, cui bono? Sometimes following the money is difficult. Money is fungible and changes hands quickly. It follows many tracks and can lead you on false trails. So when you are trying to figure out which track to follow, it's vital to ask who benefits, or cui bono. And when you follow some of these tracks, well, there seem to be quite a few Jesuits hanging around trying to look inconspicuous. Even asking that ever-so-Latin question, cui bono, sometimes isn't enough. Have you ever wondered why we use so much Latin in medicine, law, science, politics, and war? But back to the Jesuits. Maybe we never left. There are times when we can see the Jesuits directly involved in something, but these are rare events. It was a Jesuit priest who set up the Illuminati. It was a Jesuit who came up with the pre-tribulation rapture theory. The Jesuits were the model for the Gestapo. Jesuits were connected to the formation of the CIA. The Jesuits were involved in MKUltra. And now we have a Jesuit Pope. I could go on, but do you see a pattern here? I think that I do too, and it smells of dark deeds done in the basement of the Vatican. And I believe that we need to be paying attention to this dark and powerful organization as we look to the days ahead. But just remember that the Jesuits aren't the beast. They're just riding it. Are you ready for this? On Tuesday, it was when interest rates rise, it's game over. I just looked at the U.S. debt clock. Did you know that the total value of everything that America produces is less than the value of the U.S. national debt? Pretty shocking, but it gets worse. If you look at the U.S. debt clock, you see that our official debt is something like $17.5 trillion. That part of the debt is covered by the U.S. Treasury Department when they issue bills, notes, and bonds. Unfortunately, there's a ton of future debt rolling down on us. When you're looking at the U.S. debt clock webpage, that debt is at the bottom of the page, labeled U.S. unfunded liabilities, about $128.22 trillion just right now. The U.S. Treasury Department does not cover that debt yet, but they will in the future. That's a lot of debt, and when there's debt, there's an interest rate and an interest payment. So what happens when the interest rate goes up? I've been paying attention to King World News for a while, but I generally listen to the broadcast. I pretty much depend on Steve to point out important articles, and he picked up one that caught my attention. Embry, Propaganda, Lies, in a World Headed for Disaster. And it was this quote that got me started. Quote, "And with the amount of debt that's in the whole system, this creates an enormous problem for the central planners. But the one thing they can't possibly entertain is higher interest rates. So one of the reasons they are sitting on gold and silver prices is because if gold and silver really reflected the true condition in the world, interest rates would rise sharply and it would be game over. So that's the problem Western central planners are facing, and they will lose. It's just a matter of how much time it's going to take." Close quote. John Embry was the one talking here, and his comment got me thinking about interest rates as a sign that it's game over for the U.S. Now, Mr. Embry didn't say that the price of gold and silver was the only reason why interest rates are low. Another reason is that they're lying to you about inflation. Only a complete fool would buy a bond that loses money every year, and no one likes to think of themselves as complete fools. The U.S. government knows this, which is one of the reasons why they've been fiddling with the books about inflation. So let's go to John Williams of shadowstats.com. He's taken the method that the U.S. federal government used to compute inflation in 1980 and applied that method to our current economy. I include a graph of that calculation in my article. That graph comes from the ShadowStats Alternate Inflation Charts page. The official rate, or CPI, is in red. The 1980-based figure is in blue. Which one is telling the truth? Well, you can decide for yourself, but the blue one looks right to me, especially since I know a bit about how the U.S. government has been fiddling with the numbers to get that red line so low. Now, if you squint a bit, you can tell that the official inflation rate is below 2%. The ShadowStats rate looks about 9%, more than 4 times higher. What would happen to America if the U.S. 10-year T-note, i.e. the 10-year bond, was adjusted for the real inflation rate? Let's see, since 6% of our taxes goes to pay the interest rate now, well, about 30% of your taxes would go to pay the interest rate on the U.S. debt, for just the interest. I include the official table for current government spending in my article. Just by looking at the graph, it's clear that you'll need to choose which group of people to hurt. But wait, there's more. What about the other debt out there in the U.S.? Let's go back to the U.S. debt clock. Look at that part in the middle, the one that says U.S. total debt. What happens when you add 7% to the interest rate that everyone must bear? The average person currently holds a debt load of $51,631 as of now. Add an extra 7% to everyone's debt payment. That would be over $3,600 added to whatever they're paying now. Do you have an extra $300 a month lying around the house? Unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are all kinds of effects that happen when everyone's spending power declines by $300 a month. It ripples through the economy in a reverse of the multiplier effect. It would be a giant wrecking ball. Have you noticed how hard the Federal Reserve is working to keep the interest rate for the 10-year Treasury note below 3%? So keep an eye on the 10-year interest rate. When it goes over 3%, well, bad things happen. Very bad things. To paraphrase John Embry, when interest rates rise, it's game over. Are you ready for this? I didn't have an article for Wednesday, and so we skipped to Thursday. And on Thursday, it was looming clouds and ominous portents, FATCA, MH370, Crimea, and an unsettled spirit. I'm not sure if it was just me, but there was an ominous feel to yesterday, and I don't normally get feelings like that. It was like a something had moved into our realm of existence, a very unhappy something, a spooky something. That could be part of the reason. I try to always ask God for the subject to write on and the words to write before I start laying thoughts out on the screen. But yesterday the topic didn't come and the words just didn't appear, and that's very unusual. Spooky, even. Those of you that know me, well, you know that I always have something to say, but I didn't have anything to say yesterday. Very strange indeed. Someone also asked me last week whether I was going to Jerusalem for the summer. But something in my spirit said that this was the wrong question. The right question was whether my wife and I would be moving back to Jerusalem. I think that there's something telling me that we are very, very close to the end. What I wrote on Tuesday should give you an idea of how close we are to falling apart. If the true nature of the inflation that we are experiencing becomes widely known, the interest rate that the U.S. government pays on its debt, and you pay on your debt, will explode, and it will be game over. They know this, which is why they are doubling down on their lies about inflation and putting capital controls in place, to get ready for the moment when it all falls apart. We are already experiencing per-transfer limits to how much money we can send overseas. We've seen limits to how much cash we can take out of our accounts. Legislation is in place for bail-ins to steal money out of your accounts when the banks fail. When they fail, not if. But there's something else that happens on July 1st. On Monday, KB sent me an email asking about H.R. 2847. That bill was introduced in 2009 and passed in 2010, and it's one of the most awful bits of legislation since Obamacare. It's FATCA, and it's evil. The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, or FATCA, comes into effect on July 1, 2014, 6 months after it was supposed to be law. Most of us living abroad know about this, and we are happy to have been given an extra grace period. You are probably wondering why I'm so repulsed by this law. Am I wanting to avoid paying taxes? Not at all. In fact, FATCA isn't about taxes. It's about control. Controlling every American, everywhere they go. The amount of revenue FATCA is expected to generate isn't all that much more than the cost of the FATCA program. So, why are they doing this? Well, when the U.S. dollar collapses, they will use the global control grid that FATCA is creating to lock the gates of the U.S. in an attempt to keep capital from escaping the clutches of the government. FATCA will be very important to the powers that be. If you think that I'm engaging in hyperbole, you need to take a good hard look at the examples of hyperinflationary collapse in history. They always place harsh controls on money that moves in and out of the country. They always make foreign bank accounts illegal if you do not live abroad. They always crush the country where hyperinflation is taking place. Worse, I believe that FATCA could be laying the foundation for asset confiscation by the government from Americans living outside the U.S. This is an ugly law that seeks to impose American control in every banking institution throughout the world. Furthermore, I believe that this is yet another piece of data that points to the collapse of the American empire and the devastation that will follow that collapse. Now about missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370. There are quite a few elements to the story of Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 that are very, very troubling. Passenger cell phones remained active long after the plane was supposed to have crashed. The transponder switched off abruptly with no indication of problems or even a decline in altitude. Also, the radar return for the plane completely and abruptly disappeared, which should be physically impossible. There were also unidentified aircraft active in the area and behaving unusually. We undoubtedly can explain the ringing cell phones, but the transponder is a problem. Also a problem is the complete disappearance of the aircraft while at a very high altitude. Yes, I understand about secondary radar being transponder only, but the militaries of the region should have been tracking this aircraft. They are strangely quiet. They either cannot account for the disappearance of flight MH370 or they don't want to. I've included an interesting video and commentary of the radar track of the Malaysian aircraft in my article. Now, it's possible that this was a freak accident that will someday be explained, but right now I'm having a hard time believing that there's nothing nefarious at work here. Also, I am very troubled by the juxtaposition of so many other events to this point in time. For continuous updates on this situation, you can go to the mirror.co.uk news area. They have a continuously updating page on missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370. Now on to Crimea. In 3 days, on Sunday, March 16th, Crimea will vote to leave Ukraine. In fact, the way the ballot is worded, there really is no option to preserve the status quo. It's either slowly joining Russia or quickly joining Russia. Russia or Russia? Which do you want? Worse, Crimea is just the beginning. Once Russia has a firm grip on Crimea, it will proceed to encourage secessionist votes in the rest of southeastern Ukraine. All of that pretty much means one thing: war. I'm very unsettled by all the above and more. I'm starting to think that you might not have any time left. Are you ready for this? On Friday, it was the next round in the U.S.-Russian chess match. What's coming next is going to be interesting. The U.S. and Europe started this game and planned out their moves years ago. They knew exactly what would happen and when it would happen. I'm sure that some strategies being used in this current game had to be modified as we got closer to game time in Kiev, but there are only so many pieces on the board, and everyone knows how the board is laid out. By the way, before I forget, Dave Hodges has also been describing our current confrontation in terms of a chess match, but from a different perspective. You can see his 3-part series on his website. Now the question is, what's the next move? On Thursday, John Forbes Kerry puffed out his chest, strutted out onto center stage, and wagged his finger at Mr. Putin. If Russia didn't back off from their aggression in Crimea, the West was going to make them pay. You, haven't noticed much in the way of armies being marched around in Europe, right? Right, so shooting is right out. No bombs either. But there might be some stern looks and growling. Mr. Kerry has years and years of experience at looking stern, so we can expect that. I suspect that it takes a lot of work for John Kerry to not look stern. Oh, and let's not forget angry letters to the editor. However, that's not expected to do much, which is why John Kerry used the S word, sanctions. And that is going to mean cutting off the supply of something. Which kind of begs for this question. What is it that Russia could possibly want from the U.S. and Europe that it doesn't already have? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. Money. More importantly, money for natural gas. The globalists have known that this conflict was going to center around natural gas. They knew that this was how it would work out in Ukraine, so you can bet that they intended it to go this way. The globalists may even have expected Putin to shut off the natural gas himself. However, Putin isn't stupid. He knows that his opponents are expecting him to use his trump card. So he didn't. He quietly sent in troops with instructions to shoot no one, so if Putin wasn't going to cooperate by turning off the natural gas, well, the globalists would do it for him. Expect that to happen on Monday, or at least the agreement that it will happen. There are some interesting thoughts that I will be sharing with you Monday morning. This game is going to play out in a way that makes perfect sense once you see all the pieces and where they are placed. No matter how hard you try, there is just no way to escape prophecy. Are you ready for this? Well, this has been the Weekend ShockCast for March 15th, 2014, and I'm John Little for Megashock.com. Have a great weekend, everyone.